Good morning, everyone. This is JT Keating. I'm the Vice President of Product Strategy for Zimperium, and we'd like to welcome you to another webinar. This one we're very excited about. It's the introduction/reintroduction of zIAP, our award-winning software development kit that embeds our security protection directly inside of any mobile app in a matter of minutes. So I'm going to be joined, and actually the talent for this program is Chris Dworkin, our general manager of our in-app security business. So Chris is going to actually be the one running through everything. And in classic fashion, we will try and keep this to maybe 20 minutes worth of content, and then go to Q&A. And along the Q&A line, if you can please make sure and send in any questions you may have in the Q&A section. And again, for those folks that haven't been on one of our webinars recently, we're not using the chat capability. So even if you do have any questions, say technical, et cetera, please throw it in the Q&A section. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. And Chris, thank you very much for joining us, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, JT. 20 minutes may be tough. I sometimes like to talk a little bit, but keep me in check, and I'll do my best. So let me get started with why we're doing what we're doing. So mobile apps are critical for every single organization. I didn't think we would ever get an argument about the importance of mobile and mobile apps. So just about every organization that's out there today, they have a mobile app. What they use it for, that's a different story. But what's even more interesting, a lot of organizations, for what they do, their mobile app is their business. It's not a piece of it, it's their entire business. So what's been going on over the last few years, for most enterprises, mobile started out as something they were adding, an additional channel they were adding to their business. And over time, what we've realized is the importance of mobile. It's actually taken over as the primary channel by which organizations engage, interact, and sell to their customers or consumers. So it's critical that we pay really close attention to what we're doing within mobile and our mobile apps. So for us, we look at three different vectors, right? The unfortunate reality, let me back up for a second, is the devices that our apps are running on are all vulnerable to attack. We look at the device attacks, network attacks, and malicious apps a little bit different. That's where we focus our efforts. So I think most people understand what malicious apps are all about. They're all over the place, but the reality of what a malicious app is intended for, it's not meant to be a targeted attack at somebody. The intent for a malicious app is to cast a very wide net, see if somebody is going to download that malicious app from one of the app stores, and see what information that we can collect. So the question that we always like to ask folks, right, is do you believe your organization has data or information that's critical enough to protect? And I assume the answer, for those who are either listening live to the webinar or going to listen to the recording, I assume that everybody is going to say that yes, their information is important enough to protect. So when we think about that, right, we also have to figure out, are we doing everything that we need to do or can do to protect those apps? So when we think about what is actually happening when a bad guy or a bad actor is looking to target us, they're not going to build an app, put it out into the app store, and hope that somebody from your company downloads that app. What they're going to do is they're going to target your organization, the individuals of your organization. They're going to use what we like to call a targeted attack. They're going to sit in a coffee shop. They're going to camp out outside of your office or your building someplace, or somewhere where a lot of individuals would typically go. And they're going to set up a rogue access point, possibly. They're going to perform some kind of man-in-the-middle attack. Their ultimate goal is to gain persistent footprint on the device so that they can get an elevation of privilege. At that point, it's kind of game over, right? Once they own that device, they can do whatever it is that they want to do. So unfortunately, when that happens, you as an organization, as an enterprise, are the one who bears the brunt of the damages, right? So we have to think about our reputation, right? Reputation is what keeps us going in business. It's why we exist. People understand what our brand is. It's what makes us recognizable compared to the person next to us that might be doing something very similar to what we do, right? Customer trust is what keeps our customers happy and coming back to us. And honestly, the user experience, it's what we live for when we build our mobile apps. We have to have an amazing user experience to guarantee that customers come back again and again, refer us to others. If at any point any of these are tarnished, even in the slightest possible way, the impact to our business can be significant. The second area is theft. This one's a little easier to understand. Clearly, unauthorized fraud, unauthorized access and or fraud is critical. We need to know that the people accessing our systems, they're who they say they are. They're supposed to be in there doing what they're doing. IP theft, this is something that we work for years to develop our IP as companies. We need to protect it, and we need to do everything we possibly can do to protect it. PII data is the next one, right? And that one's extremely, important for lots of reasons. But very simply, we have a corporate responsibility. If we're going to collect consumers' personal data, we have to protect it in every way, shape, or form. All right, so all the above items are what the bad guys are after. It's why they exist, and it's why they persist at what they do. The reality is, if they are targeting you and you aren't protected in every possible way, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when they're going to find their way in, right? So we have to do more than what we currently do. And then the last is financial loss. So when we think about financial loss, revenue, this is why these guys do what they do. This is a business for them as well. So they're going to come after you. They're coming after your money, your consumer's money. There's also compliance and fines. So your losses don't stop the money you had stolen, right? The fines are going to likely be even worse than what you lost from a theft or a piracy standpoint. And then the undercover costs. So I think a lot of people don't realize the amount of money that has to be spent to identify the problems that actually caused our breach or our problem, whatever the case may be, the cost to resolve them, find the root cause, make sure they never happen again. So these add up in a huge, huge way. So let's talk about why this is so difficult, right? Traditionally, we've layered and layered and layered different security into back office systems, into the network and cellular communications. It's been going on for years. It's very well known and understood. The problem is that mobile is now the new endpoint for the most part, and it's just sitting out there exposed, right? There are certain things that people are doing, but it's exposed and it's waiting for the attackers to have their way with it. Right. So what's the issue? What is it that we're trying to control here? So you don't control the environment in which your apps are being operated. That's problematic. So we are the admins of these devices where our apps are running. We don't always do the smartest things, unfortunately, JT, right? So you can't control the Wi-Fi the user's connecting to. You can't control the device configurations and changes and mods that the user does on that device where your app is running. And you also can't control the other apps that the user installs. So because of all these things, you put your app and your enterprise at risk. So this is an interesting example for me, right? There are a lot of approaches people can take to securing an app. I'll be honest, a lot of the things that are out there today are just insufficient. They're insufficient. Quite often, they're just ineffective as well. So some of these common approaches, and I'm not saying, by the way, any of these are bad, they're not, but things like obfuscation, right? People obfuscate their code, so it's difficult for the bad guy to analyze, see what that code is doing. They use encryption techniques to protect the data at rest, data in transit. They also do some simplistic jailbreak and root detection to make sure that no one has taken over that device. Unfortunately, these aren't enough, right? So here's a perfect example. And actually, I want everyone to think about something. Most of these basic techniques, they're being done in just about every app out there today. So if they were sufficient, would we still be seeing things like this example right here and others that frankly are in the news almost every day? Here is one where the attacker was able to, through vulnerabilities in the mobile app, get access directly to the back-end system for this consumer bank and generate transactions at the API level. And they were able to steal 2.5 million pounds worth of customers' money. So again, techniques are out there, they're being used. If they were sufficient, we wouldn't be reading about things like this. And by the way, this customer unfortunately had to deal with some of those fines that I talked about before. I think they paid somewhere around $16 million or 16 million pounds in fines because of this attack. So good news, right? Very good news. Right? zIAP was built to make sure that we get that last mile of protection. All the things that we talked about before with regards to what isn't in your control, these are the things that zIAP is going to focus on and help us with. So let me tell you a little bit about what this is. So Z9 is Zimperium's world-class machine learning-based detection engine. That is the core of everything that we do. It's one engine. It can be deployed in a few different ways. It's built to defend against targeted attacks. So if a bad guy, as I said before, is trying to target someone in your organization, they're not going and putting a malicious app out there and waiting and hoping. They're going to have a targeted approach to coming after you. So Z9 has been trained using machine learning techniques for years. Our machine learning is critical. And unfortunately, machine learning is something that's become a bit of a buzzword. So I want to make sure that everyone understands what it is we do and why it's different. And we have some information and white papers that are out there that you can actually read up a little bit more on to learn about our machine learning techniques. But once we do our machine learning up in the lab, we actually take the results of that and it gets pushed down to the device. Why is that important? Well, if it's not on device, that means that a network connection needs to be made somewhere to figure out a signature or figure out if something that's identified on device is actually bad or not. We don't have to worry about any of those things. Everything we do is on device. So,
Chris, just to interject something real quick. Two things. One is, folks, don't forget to put your questions in as we go through and do this. And Chris, I think the other thing for me, and I'd be interested in your take on this. Obviously, there's certain banking malware and things like that are out there, like BankBot, and we've actually, of course, done a lot of work with BankBot, breaking it apart, et cetera. And these are attacks that will basically, in BankBot's case, put a fake template on top of a legitimate app. And I think another thing that's critical to on-device detection is machine learning or machine speed attacks need a machine speed response. And so I think that, and for instance, in order to defeat BankBot, you need to be able to detect it and stop it in near real time. And so going off in the cloud or something like that with the delay just leaves you completely exposed. What are your thoughts about that? Do you agree with that, or do you think I'm overstating it?
You are not overstating it in any way, shape, or form, JT. You're absolutely right. Just think about it, right? If I'm the attacker and I now own that device or that network connection, what's the first thing that I may choose to do when I'm trying to gain access? I may cut off network connectivity. You may never be able to go out there and actually look up those signatures, right? Right. I could do my damage. I could clean up my path, and you may never know I was there. So I couldn't say it any better, JT. You're spot on.
All right, cool. Thanks.
So let me continue on here. So there are two different ways that Z9 is typically rolled out. One is through an app that we have called ZIPS, stands for Z Intrusion Protection System. And then the second, which is what we're focused on today, is it's called zIAP. zIAP is our Z in-app protection. And that is the SDK that will allow you to take everything that we just described with Z9, embed it directly into your app so that your app can be protected in the same way that we protect our own apps. So let me talk a little bit about what the solution looks like overall. This is important to understand because our solution is absolutely unique. Once we are embedded into the app and deployed, number one, we passively monitor the device statistics for anomalies, and that's what Z9 is doing. If we identify something that doesn't look legitimate, set any kind of threat or risk, we're going to take that and we're going to raise it inside the application, not to the user, but to the application so that the developer can choose to react however they feel appropriate to that threat. We're also going to take that threat, excuse me, we're also going to take that threat information and we're going to push it up to our console. So all of our findings are constantly being pushed up to our console so that you can view that data and do what you would like to it. From there, you may choose to push it out to another custom platform that you have. You may choose to push it down to your SIM. We have server-side APIs that allow you to do that so that you can look at, react to, handle that data however you choose. So let me give you a quick example. This is one of our larger banking customers. We actually had, this is very unique, and all the data that we're going to walk through is actually based on the first 30 days of the deployment. We deployed to over 26 million consumer devices through a consumer banking app. Once we did that, we immediately started to see what was happening across that consumer landscape. So the interesting thing, first of all, that I just want to point out, what we started to identify wasn't anything new. It was happening the day before we deployed, a month before we deployed, a year before we deployed. But once we gave visibility to what was actually happening, the information was actually quite terrifying, to be quite honest. We actually saw over 900,000 risk-related items that were identified. But here's the more concerning part. There were 26,000 attacked devices. So think about that for a second. This is during that fraction of time that the consumer banking app was up and running and being interacted with by the user, that all of these attacks were identified. So 26,000 of them. What our customer told us was that we gave them visibility into $1.1 billion worth of customer money that was exposed to fraud or potential fraud. So this is staggering. And again, this is happening everywhere, right? It's not just happening to them. This data represents an extremely large user base. And again, you can almost be assured that it's happening on your devices out in the wild as well. So here's a little bit more of a breakdown on what some of those attacks were. So I'll start from the bottom and work my way up. So the risky apps or malicious apps, there were 2,000 of those across that 26,000. Users that were actually on compromised networks were 3,000 of those. 21,000 devices were actually compromised. All right, so that is really bad. I'm not sure how else to describe it, JT. If there's anything else you'd like to add here?
Yeah, but, no, actually I would, Chris, thanks. You know, guys, there are some laws in security that are, you know, simple and finite, right? You know, land and expand. You know, the bad guys will always find the weakest link and then go sideways. Customized attacks, as Chris was talking about, you know, not necessarily just going with something that's off the shelf that everybody already knows about. And persistence. Persistence is as old as security, where if I'm going to take the time to compromise a device, I want to be able to do everything on that device and to be able to continue to doing it persistently, hence the name. The things that's different in mobile is every app is in its own container. So apps can't play around with other apps like they can in traditional endpoints. So the primary objective, as Chris has been talking about, the primary objective, whether it's a consumer use case or an enterprise use case, is to compromise the device. it's to elevate privileges, because in mobile, unless you have elevated your privilege above and beyond those containers, you can't do anything really, except for just within that app. So the fact that in a statistically very valid sample set, during that 7-minute little slice, and they take a look at those phones, the fact that 80% of the attacks are device compromises means these phones were compromised at some other point in the past, right? And it means that those people have complete ability to do everything from bank bot to turn on the camera to to transfer money to whatever, right? So I think this is really interesting. When we do our threat data for Zips, the other product that Chris was talking about, in Zips case, it's running 100% of the time on devices that people control and own, corporate devices, right? It's usually 90% plus. We just got finished doing a whole bunch of webinars. 90% of the attacks we're detecting with Zips are network-based attacks, right? 12% roughly, 8% roughly are device attacks, and 2% are malicious apps. The reason that's valid or interesting is we stop it at the first step of the kill chain. So when Zips is running 100% of the time, the very first thing where they are trying to take over that device, we stop it, which is why we keep saying the bad guys control the network, because that's the primary way of delivering it. If you look at zIAP, this is data where all of those network attacks and all the exploits and all the phishing or whatever has already occurred. And this just shows the objective is to compromise the device. And if somebody owns that device, it doesn't matter if you're talking about encryption or two-factor authentication or any of that, they can still steal from you. So I think it's really interesting, because this is the largest pure data set that shows what the nature of the attacks are. So that's what I would just add to it, Chris.
That's great, JT. Thank you. So there's one more slide I want to spend a few minutes on here and make sure, because these are questions that I personally get asked constantly. And again, if I'm a developer or within a development organization and I'm thinking about using an SDK or something to help me with mobile threat detection as an example, there are some basic things I'm always thinking about, need to verify, I'm going to be testing for. So let's talk about the first one. So live deployments. In this case, one single customer, we deployed to over 25 million consumer devices. We have much more than that actively protected currently, but this is referring to a single deployment. So the beauty of the way that we deploy one of our SDKs as an example, once it's embedded into somebody's app, and I'll walk through in a couple moments what that actually looks like and how simple that is. Once it's actually embedded, once we deploy our app to the App Store, we don't have to do anything else. There's no more work that we have to do. As our users or consumers update their apps, they will now have the Z9 and zIAP SDK and all the protection associated with it on their devices as well. So easy, rapid implementations. We just have a few really simple API calls that go into your application. Quite honestly, this is a 10-minute exercise. You can have every bit of our Z9 capability embedded in app in 10 minutes or less. Passive, non-intrusive detection. So what we refer to here, when we are in app and we're running embedded in your app, I should say, we aren't doing anything that is going to impact the user experience of the device. So what we do is we set up a callback as an example, and passively we will monitor device statistics, do all the great things that Z9 does. If we identify something, we'll raise it back up in the app. So when we talk about remediation as an example, right, what do we do if we actually identify something bad that's happening? Once we raise that back into the app, it's up to you as the app development organization to decide how you want to handle those threats. So we actually have quite a bit of work that we've done with our customer base to actually help guide you as to what's important and what's not. The next one is around the footprint. So one thing that's always really important to understand is, how big is this SDK? What's it going to do to my application once I deploy? Is it going to bloat my app? So the very simple answer to that is absolutely not. We worry every single day about the size of our SDK because we know how important this is. So you will not ever have any kind of app bloating. Shouldn't be any concern whatsoever. The next one around app performance and potential degradation. So again, going back to user experience, we have to make sure user experience never takes a hit, right? It's the most important thing when we're dealing with mobile. I laugh about a statistic that I heard a ways back, that a user will actually bail out on your application if it takes more than 3 seconds for a screen to come up. I don't know about you, JT, but my patience is probably a little better than that, not much, maybe a little bit better. So again, we need to be ensuring that performance is never going to take a hit. So I can guarantee we will have zero negative impact to user experience because of the way we do passive detection within the SDK. The next one is around the data. What do we do with that data? So it's one thing to raise the information in the app so that you can handle remediation. It's another to decide where else I need that data and how I'm going to get it there. So as I said before, we push all of our device collected information about threats. We push that all to our console. So you'll always have the ability to log into the console, see exactly what has gone on, do the type of analysis or forensics you need to do to help you further kind of analyze what we're seeing, make better decisions about how you do maybe further remediations in app. But you also may want to take that data and push it out even further to a SIM that you may have. Maybe you have Splunk or some other system, or you have some custom platforms where you're doing fraud data analysis or any kind of data analysis for that matter. So APIs that we expose are important to us because we know how important this data is. The last is customized in-app remediation. Right? So I mentioned that a couple times in these last few boxes here that we hit on. But we don't do the remediation. We provide you the information. You then decide which of that information, which pieces of it are important. So as a simple example, any critical threats that we identify and raise for you, by the way, you control what's critical and what's not. You can change some of those things. But let's say, as an example, we take a critical threat. When we provide that information to you, then you can go and create customized remediations in your app based on those critical threats. So lots more that we can talk through, and clearly we're happy to do that offline for anyone who's interested. JT, was there anything else that you wanted to add here? I'm about to kind of summarize and wrap things up here.
No, I think you're definitely hitting it. I think something that is very important for people to know is the DNA and the fabric of Zimperium. We've been built from the very beginning to provide enterprise security, but a huge chunk of our folks come from the dev world, not just developing security software, but Chris and John Michelson, our CTO, and even our CEO. All came to us from a developer-centric organization. And so all of these points you're talking about here have been things that have been designed from the very beginning because we knew that they were critical to be able to provide protection, but without impacting any experience. So a lot of kudos and credit go to the guys who come from this world, and I think it's important to note it. So yeah, go ahead and wrap it up, Chris, and then we'll get into some Q&A.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, JT. So just to summarize for everybody, I think the first point is straightforward, and I hope everybody realizes the devices that we're operating our apps on are vulnerable to attack. We also talked a little bit about the different types of potential damage that you as an organization have to contend with when something bad does happen. We talked a little bit about traditional solutions, right? And the fact that these attacks that are still happening out there, they're happening in environments or in applications, I should say, that have some of that traditional protection in place. So we have to think about what else we can and should be doing, and that's why Z9, zIAP, and zips actually exist. zIAP protects your app and session from those threats. So once you embed zIAP into your app, we don't have to worry any longer about those DNA attacks that we talked about previously. zIAP is proven. We've got implementations, individual ones within the tens of millions, and quite a bit more active devices under protection than even that. And then lastly, and most important, so JT, in the amount of time it took me to do this presentation, anyone out there could have had zIAP embedded into their app already. It's that easy. So
could have done it 2 or 3 times, to be honest with you.
With all my long-windedness, it could have done it at least 3 times. So just for everybody, and I'm going to leave this screen up while we go through some Q&A, but at any time, anyone can log in to the URL that's on the screen. You can sign up to use the product today for free. Check it out. It's really simple and easy. And then, of course, if anyone has any questions, there's lots of ways to contact us. All are actually available once you get logged into the site. So JT, if you want to check and see if there's any questions, or if you want to add anything to wrap up.
No, actually, we'll dive into questions. Well, I mean, first of all, Chris, thank you very much for running us through it. It was a great presentation, and my commentary about being able to do it 3 times had less to do with long-windedness as it had to do with the fact that it's just that it's easy to install zIAP. So the first question goes back to the banking example, our large bank that you were talking about. And the question is kind of straightforward and I think a legitimate one, which is, how did the SDK contribute to the savings and fraud?
So it's a good question. What actually happened, and I think I had mentioned, but very, very briefly, the attacks that were happening, first of all, were happening well before our SDK was implemented into that app. So what we did was we provided visibility, I should say, into what was actually happening that they previously had no insight into. So the activities that their fraud team in this case would go through, if they now add the information we provide to what they already do and already know, they now have a much better sense of what's happening within these devices and apps. They understand how to do basic things like some of the root cause that I talked about, figuring out why these things happen. So again, a lot of this was about the visibility. The way that they came up was question JT specific. Do you think around the numbers?
No, 1.1. No, I think you nailed it. And I'm just going to add something onto that.
Okay.
I was actually on a call right before this with a bank, some folks that handle security for banks in the Middle East. And coming back to a point that Chris made a little while ago, ballpark, for every $1 of fraud, there's $3 spent investigating fraud, right? And the interesting point that these guys were making was that the billion is the start point, that visibility of it. But they said, we see a direct path to reducing the 3 as well, because so much of the investigation comes into, well, is the person really being honest? Is the phone really compromised? How do we know the phone's compromised? A lot of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. In this case, it's like, no, it's compromised. It's on a bad network. It's, so no, you're absolutely right. It's all about the visibility, but I think it's interesting from some of the banks we're talking to, it's not just how much is in the accounts that are now exposed. It's also how much is it going to take us to actually investigate it. And if you can accelerate that investigation with good visibility, you're adding another level of savings. So, okay. So next question is a 2-parter. I'll take the first one and I'll have you take the second one. How about that? Because I'm the one reading the questions, which means I get to choose which one I'm going to take. So The two-part question, and I'll answer the first one, but at least to let you know what the second one is. Two-part question is, number one, is the ML in the SDK or backend? So I'll take care of that one. And then number two is the obvious, how much does it cost? So the machine learning in the SDK, back to what Chris is saying, and I think it's critical and it's directly related to some of the benefits that Chris was talking about. We train, we've got white papers on our site, so hit the white paper, hit the site, or you can email either one of us and we'd be happy to talk with you more about it. We actually do all of the machine learning itself in our lab against billions of data points. We can throw as many servers at it as we want, et cetera, et cetera. Once we learn what are the unique changes in the system, for instance, that equal a device, network, or app attack, we create a little thing called a classifier. And that's actually all it's doing is saying, okay, I need this piece of data, this piece of data, this piece of data, this piece of data. It equals this with high efficacy, right? That small little equation is what actually gets put down on device in the SDK. So we're not actually doing machine learning on the device. That would be very process intensive. All the machine learning occurs in the cloud until we know that we're very efficient. Those little classifiers are what go down and are actually in the SDK itself. Train in the lab, detect on device. So that's number one. And number two is, how much does it cost?
So you're giving me the hard one, huh, JT?
Hey, it's your business.
So
you're the GM.
Well, thank you. So what I'm going to not do is walk through details of pricing, but I will give everybody a couple of data points to take away. Just like it says on the screen, we actually have a free option. So at any point, anyone can log into that console that is up there and gain full access to our SDK, be able to put it in their app and start using it for free and keep it free. So that's the first thing, JT, which is fantastic. So depending on the size of your organization, the needs that you may have, you may never pay another dollar. Okay, now, but for certain people that have other needs that go beyond what our free accounts will offer, the way that we structure our pricing is based on the total number of devices that the SDK is deployed once your app goes out to your consumer base. And then if there's any other further details, you can actually have somebody from our sales organization, we can actually have them reach out and go through some further details for you.
That is perfect. And it appears that is the end of our Q&A, and we're right around our 35 minute mark. So Chris, I would like to thank you very much for your time. Everybody else, I'd like to thank you for your interest and your questions. Again, you can come in and log up and sign up anytime you'd like. And/or if you have any questions, my email is jt.keating@zimperium.com. And Chris, I assume it's chris.dworkin@zimperium.com if anybody has a question.
That's right.
And
thanks,
with that,
JT, that is it.
Perfect. With that, I would just like to thank everybody and hope you have a great day.